The first week there wasn't much to do, mainly just and then it's like work samples.
So good evening, everyone. We're excited that you're here with us today. Today, the panel conversation will be about technology, but I will let our moderator and our guests be introduced. But on behalf of FIU, our Board of Trustees, we are very fortunate to have this space and very fortunate to be here in Washington, D.C., and we are excited to have our students and our guests with us as we develop and continue our programming. So for those of you that will be watching this in Miami, we welcome and say hello, but also we're happy to be here. And so DC is one of our fond places, and so we do a lot of different programming. So if you're interested in interning in Washington, D.C., you'll hear more from us about that. But feel free and enjoy today's program. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you. My name is Ronit Ponthieu. I'm going to be your moderator for today, and we will be having our lovely guest, Bethany Abate. And we're going to be talking, like she said, about AI and things of that nature. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, Bethany.
Sure. Where to begin? So my name is Bethany Abate, and I am the Director for AI Policy at an organization called the Software and Information Industry Association, also known as SIIA. SIIA is one of many technology trade associations based in DC. So we have nearly 400 companies that are members of our association. And essentially what I do in my capacity leading our AI policy portfolio is I get to engage with a lot of these companies who are developing and deploying artificial intelligence. And this ranges from really large companies like Anthropic, Google, Meta, Amazon, but also a lot of startups, a lot of education technology companies, data analytics firms, publishing companies. So big diverse range, but I work with them to understand what their kind of individual policy positions are, and then I figure out where is their consensus across kind of that technology industry sector. And from there, I then go out and I advocate that information. So, I engage with the Congress, the executive branch, increasingly state legislatures. So I've been active in a lot of states, collaborating with lawmakers there. But I'm essentially advocating on behalf of industry priorities while also working with a lot of other stakeholders in the AI policy ecosystem, including civil society, academia, and of course, government partners. So it's a very interactive job, and obviously with AI being one of the hottest policy topics in Washington, D.C., no 2 weeks are the same in this type of a role. And I'm happy to obviously dive into that more, but that's just a brief overview of the type of work that I do.
Perfect. I would say one of the first questions we're going to start off with, how did you get into this career? I think most people end up either going into artificial intelligence or like technology based work, or they just quickly dive into public policy. How did you get into the intersection of both worlds?
It's a great question, and definitely not a linear path to arriving in this place. I'll go back a little bit farther to kind of give context. When I was in high school, I was training to be a ballerina professionally. I had no interest in policy, politics, or anything of that realm. And then when I was 17, I tore my Achilles. I had an injury, and that was my whole life up until that point. So I had to kind of shift my focus and figure out what else I was interested in. So I ended up working on local political campaigns and things in my town because I was craving a sense of community, and that opened up a lot of connections in the policy field. I ended up going to a college for undergrad in Oregon, where I'm from, a small liberal arts school that was right across the street from the state capitol. And through that, when I was a college student, I was interning pretty much every semester in a variety of different government offices in the state. including the governor's office, the treasury, the legislature, the transportation department, really anywhere I could like get my hands wet. And at that point, I became interested in the technology policy ecosystem because cybersecurity was increasingly a very hot topic at that point in time, in the same way that, not to the degree that AI is now, but there was a lot of media coverage about very large-scale cyber attacks that were hitting government agencies, companies, individuals, and I was very intrigued by that. And throughout my experience in college, I really noticed a disconnect between the way government would communicate with the private sector about technology issues and vice versa. So I was actually a communications major in undergrad. I took a variety of classes in politics and some technology adjacent things, some business things, like really all over the map. But a skill that I learned was very important in this field was being able to translate between different audiences, technical, non-technical, government, private sector, all of the above. So that's kind of been the genesis for my entire career. And I always knew I wanted to come to Washington, D.C. So I initially came out here 5 years ago for graduate school. And I had wanted to actually go into the intelligence field. So I wanted to work at the CIA or the FBI or something along those lines. And my graduate program was focused on cyber policy and intelligence studies. I did that program, which lucky enough, it was only a year-long accelerated master's. I realized I wanted nothing to do with the intelligence field. I'm still fascinated by that whole line of work, but I just knew it wasn't for me. I love being public facing. I love being able to come to events like this and talk to people about what I do. And you have to kind of make some sacrifices when you're in certain branches of the government. So I ended up also simultaneously, when I came here for grad school, started off interning on a congressional committee on the Hill, and then from there went into government relations. And I started in a office for a financial services company called Allianz. It's a major insurance company based out of Germany that has a bunch of U.S. subsidiaries, company with 100,000 employees, very large. But I was on a government relations team of 3 people, so small but mighty. And I wasn't particularly interested in insurance at all, but that job gave me my foot in the door with government relations, with understanding Washington, D.C. from that corporate perspective. And through that, I really networked within the company and kind of carved out my space in my technology interest and expertise from graduate school. So again, at that point, AI still wasn't really a hot topic yet. However, we had colleagues from Europe who would come to town to do meetings with regulators, US regulators and whatnot. And they would always ask me during their visits, and this was 5 years ago, they'd say, well, what is the US doing about AI? What are they thinking about AI? And at that point, the answer was nothing. Nobody in Congress was talking about it. Very, very few people. Of course, there were, subsets of people in the policy community in Silicon Valley who were, more on that end, but it really hadn't made its way to DC yet. However, in Europe, they had been in the process of working on the EU AI Act for over 5 years. And so, again, it was I could anticipate that it was something on the horizon, but it wasn't quite there. So I tried to learn as much as I could about it, but it wasn't like how it is now when you go to an event in DC and AI is the topic of everything, even if it's something about healthcare or something about education, AI comes up in every forum. It wasn't like that at the time. So I was kind of really on my own gaining that expertise. Ended up doing a quick pivot into consulting for a hot second and just did not like it. I really wanted to hone in on the technology focus area. So I got really lucky when I found the opportunity that I have now being at SIIA, where I could just focus exclusively on AI policy because I was kind of all over the map doing all kinds of different policy areas in my early stages of my DC career. But being able to focus in on just AI has, opened my eyes to a lot of things, but it has also helped me really climb in my career very quickly as well by specializing.
And what would you say, because we know that you work at SIIA, what would you say is the role of your organization when it comes to bringing the AI conversation as well as like emerging technology? What would you say is the role of your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of voices in the public policy, government affairs ecosystem. The role of a trade association, and specifically SIIA, is to be a credible voice in representing, industry perspective, and offering an industry voice on policy-related matters. And this can, I guess one thing I'll point out is, a lot of companies and a lot of individual organizations, they have their own government relations people, their own AI policy people, right? So if you're Google or Amazon or whoever, right? A lot of lawmakers and a lot of stakeholders on the Hill, they would rather hear the perspective of a group that is nonpartisan. So we're a nonpartisan organization. I work with both sides of the aisle, who is representing a collective viewpoint on a particular issue, because obviously different organizations and different businesses have their own objectives and their own goals. However, a lot of our members that we represent, they're in competition with one another when it comes to the business side of the whole AI race, right? But there's value add in having the voice and the perspective of an organization that can be representative of an industry while not favoring one organization over another.
So you mentioned as far as like the public government, they're still relatively new as far as getting information when it comes to AI and technology and like its advancements. What would you say is the most important thing for students to know, as like the government officials themselves are still learning stuff? What do you think is most important for us to know as students?
In terms of like if you're working in a government office or just in general?
What's being shared to the government officials, like things that are important for shaping the U.S. and AI technology advancements?
Yeah. I think like a lot of government officials, I'll say, they're getting more up to speed than they were 2.5 years ago when I first started this line of work in AI policy. What's really important is being able to message clearly, like, what is the goal, what is the aim with said policy on AI. I think we're at a point now where people are very curious about it, so they're open-minded to hearing a variety of perspectives on what's going on in AI. Because, to be frank, a lot of people don't have concrete answers. And I'm one of the people who will willingly admit, when I don't have the answer. You had a question in the prepared questions about, where do you see things in 5 years? I genuinely don't know how to answer that question, right? So I think it's important to know that, lawmakers are trying to view this also from a little bit of a skeptical lens. At the end of the day, the Congress and the state lawmakers, they have constituencies to adhere to, but that they care about. But then when it comes to more executive branch and other kind of government functions, I think for them, they're looking to industry for guidance on how to use the tools best, how to help it have AI help serve the mission and the capacity that they work in. But there are still gaps on how to do that effectively, and a whole can of worms in terms of solving a lot of challenges with not only adoption, but adoption in a way that is safe, effective, et cetera.
Thank you. One of the questions I wanted to ask was more regarding being in the space as an intern. I think most of us here in this room are interns or have been in the intern space. What was it like moving from an intern to now being a staffer, being hired, and also just saying yes to an opportunity that I know you said that you weren't really sure about to begin with, because I think insurance you were mentioning.
Yeah.
That's not something that you were familiar with. What advice would you give to interns who are given opportunities that they're not familiar with, but like giving them the chance to say yes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think being open-minded and being flexible early on is really crucial. At the same time, that's not to discount the fact that if you are a very ambitious person and very, you have a vision of what you think you exactly want to do, that you shouldn't pursue that and follow that. But as I mentioned, I came to the city thinking I was going to do one thing, and I'm doing something like completely different. So I think for me, being really open-minded, saying yes to things that were maybe out of my comfort zone in the beginning helped me a lot and launched me forward quite a bit. One thing I did in my first year working full-time in DC was go to as many events as I could, and that's a huge thing in this city, is all the networking and the cocktail hours and all of that. And in the beginning, it's good to just say yes. And again, these were a lot of like financial events and things. I didn't really always care about the subject matter, but simply being in the room holds a lot of value because I soaked up a lot of information, being very observant and just paying attention to how things work. You don't have to necessarily interject yourself. You can in the situations where you feel like there's an avenue to do that. But I think, figuring out how to analyze your environment, because then what that allows you to do, or what that allowed me to do, is figure out what I liked and what I didn't like based on what I was seeing, based on who I was talking to. And over time, as you're collecting that data and getting that experience, it helps you kind of pivot and steer yourself towards what you actually ultimately want to do in the years ahead.
So I want to follow up on that because I think AI, public policy, and for a long time, I think AI has been kind of foreign until we've gotten into this point. Like before, it was like, oh, robots take over the world. But now we're in like a new sphere of like we're actually getting into what used to be foreign to us. There may be interns or students that are interested in going into that public policy sector and intersecting like artificial intelligence. What would you say that I guess could appease or make people feel a little bit more aware when it comes to like their fears about security and privacy and things like that?
That's a great question, and it's a tricky one. My personal view is, I think rejecting the tools and saying I'm not going to use AI at all is not great. I understand the rationale why a lot of people are angling that way and saying I'm not going to use it unless I have to because of the persistent challenges. The problem is we don't make AI better if we just disengage from it, right? Disengaging from it entirely lets the, kind of elites and the people who are steering the ship of how this goes, that enables them more. That gives them more power. At the end of the day, like that's probably better for them if people disengage, right? And that's what I'm concerned about. Especially, there's a lot of statistics coming out now about different groups that have more distrust over AI than others. Women, for example, are more cautious and more hesitant than men to embrace it. On the other hand, though, what's problematic is the statistics around the folks who are in the room actually building the tools as well, or disproportionately men, or coming from Silicon Valley. So there's a lot of kind of equity considerations here that I understand why people are hesitant. But I think learning about it, experimenting with it, and doing that through a lens of looking at, well, what does this do well and what doesn't this do well, rather than over relying on it, because that's the other extreme. And I'm starting to see kind of two extremes, especially with younger folks, where it's either I'm not using this at all, or I'm using this for everything. Like, I can't even send a text to my friend without asking ChatGPT. And that's concerning too, right? So does that kind of answer your question? Yeah.
I do want to ask, how do you find that middle ground between like using it for everything, but then also using it in a way that's not disruptive to you being able to actually have these skills on your own?
It's a good question, and I think it depends on the context. Like, using it in the context of work versus maybe experimental in your personal life versus like in the context of education, which I know like different schools and different teachers and everyone has different policies on that. So I won't get into that. But, from a personal standpoint, if you just want to learn about AI, you just want to experiment it, and you're trying to strike that balance, start small. Like, start with, I'm going to spend 30 minutes a day, like, trying something out. I have this idea that I want to see what the output is. Set a time limit on that. I think also what's important is, again, kind of reflecting upon the outcome of what what the experiment led to. So you can file that away and say, okay, that I'm not going to use it or rely on it for that type of a context, but maybe I'll try something else. I think, if you're in a workplace and they're requiring you to use it, or they are encouraging you to try it out in certain contexts, I just say, as long as you're remaining in the scope of the policy of the workplace that you're in and not going beyond that, because there's a lot of like workplace concerns right now of sensitive data, employees putting in sensitive data into the chatbots and the concerns around that. So I think leveraging, if there are trainings, whether that's being offered to you or things you can seek out yourself and just try it. I think that's, again, better than, and doing that consistently, I think, is helpful rather than kind of on a one-off basis.
I want to go a little bit off script. A little bit about the demographics that you were talking about, trying to get more people to use these things correctly and also being open to using these things. How can we reach the older demographic that are still finding AI to be nouveau? Because I think the younger generation, it'll be easier for them to get on board and to move forward with AI and learn the things a bit quicker because they've been exposed to AI for a little bit longer. How do we make it easier for the older generation to be able to learn and grow with AI?
That's a good question, and one that's actually people hadn't really been talking about very much until recently. And I think the recent interest in this is actually because of a lot of the fraud and scam, AI fraud and scam being perpetuated, where, your grandmother answers the phone and hears your voice, but it's actually a deep fake and they're asking for money. And, so like that's a problem. So, reaching those populations, I think, relying on younger people to to kind of help with some of that education. It's hard because, AI, the concept you're talking about is AI literacy. And we have mostly in years past been talking about that in the context of youth and in the context of people in the workforce. I think there is a role for industry and for technology companies to think about, well, what does AI literacy look like for older adults? I think maybe not even just technology companies, but like financial services organizations. Maybe we need to leverage like the AARP. Like, what are the kind of outlets and avenues where they are involved, and try to get to them through that. But it's kind of a whole of, I call it a whole of society effort, AI literacy, because everybody's receiving their information from different channels. And the more people that we get who are just kind of in community talking about it, not necessarily like let's sit down and let's like Claude code and like learn this together, but like let's talk about the equity challenges or the what I'm concerned about, what I'm excited about, even just spurring that discourse in community, I think is really important. I think we're starting to see more of that, partially because at least from what I've seen, there's a lot more online stuff picking up about AI. So I think that's leading to more community discourse, but a little bit off topic, but slightly related. I think personally, the technology industry hasn't done a great job reaching a lot of people, reaching the right people. And I have talked with a lot of people at these very large companies about this, that there is a gap in not only educating about the tools and you know, doing this type of AI literacy stuff, but also being able to explain the benefits and the risks. I think people are very in tune with the risks, but the actual benefits of AI that are not hypothetical, I think we talk a lot in the hypothetical right now, like this will lead to XYZ outcome. I think if more people had an understanding of what is happening today of the kind of positive use cases, that would build more public trust and again, like the goal would be to reach more people. And that's not to say you should totally let go of all of your fears about AI because of these benefits. But then when people actually know the benefits, it allows them to kind of do that weight distribution of, well, what do I think about this? And do I want to engage in the trade-off?
What safeguards do you think that the government can put in place so that people also start to feel more comfortable because they know that there's some security there?
It's a really good question. And that is kind of the biggest debate in Washington, but also really nationwide. One thing from our perspective that I don't know will necessarily reassure everybody when it comes to safeguards, but an area where there's a gap, where we think a gap could be filled like pretty immediately if people kind of got the ball rolling, is there's still a huge lack of transparency around the safety and security mechanisms inside of the biggest frontier model labs. Certain companies are picking and choosing what do we disclose, how do we disclose it, what information do we report to the government, what information are we keeping to ourselves. So there's no national federal law requiring any sort of transparency mechanism, disclosure of information of like how these models even work, what are they trained on. And you have to be careful because some of this is proprietary, but there's not even a formal mechanism for reporting this, not only to the government, but also to the public, right? There are some states that have now begun to pass their individual proposals to try and set the stage here. So I think California was first, then New York, and just this week, Illinois. They've all passed these AI safety bills. There were nearly 1,500 AI bills introduced across state legislatures across America. The problem when it comes to the frontier model security and safety and the states like kind of doing their own thing on that is the federal government has certain national security evaluation capabilities that a state regulator may not necessarily have. And this is a reason why it would be great to have a formal mechanism federally. Now, the executive branch recently put out an executive order that tries to kind of get at this testing and evaluation thing. And this relates to, if you all have seen the news about, for a couple weeks, there was a back and forth of the government restricted Anthropic's advanced model, And then they released it, and now there was some back and forth with OpenAI. There's not even a lot of transparency into that government process of what the executive branch is doing to evaluate those models. So our view is for something that has longevity and something that has clarity, both for the industry and for the public, of just understanding like what the hell is going on, is Congress has to pass a federal framework for this. There's a lot of debate, though, because the states feel concerned that maybe they will not be able to preserve their ability to legislate around AI in the event that the federal government preempts all of the existing state laws related to this. Our view at my organization, and different organizations in town have different views on this, like federal versus state preemption topic, is there are a lot of areas where the states should remain their capacity to regulate AI. So when it comes to consumer protection, when it comes to insurance is an area that's traditionally regulated by the states. When it comes to civil rights, when it comes to public safety, there are a lot of areas where, yes, of course, the states should be able to legislate and regulate on AI in their state. And states have always been the laboratories of democracy. And in the absence of Congress maybe addressing certain pillars of the AI policy ecosystem, it does give constituents in their own individual states a feeling and a sense of protection. So there's a big debate in Washington right now around how do you delineate that? What aspects of AI policy should be a federal issue and what should be a state issue? Now, from a public trust perspective, I think it gets really confusing potentially it's frustrating when your federal government doesn't have a baseline standards for this. But it's also frustrating when it feels like there's a threat of, my state may potentially not be able to act while Congress isn't acting. So I think that's the lack of clear policy can create more trust or less trust rather than I have my state that did this. And then also you want people to feel like nationwide they're protected and it's not just, the folks in California and New York have the strongest protections. So that's another concern and why there is, I think, a value in doing something federally, but it's how do you do that right, balancing all of the stakeholders in DC who are trying to get their hands on the situation.
I think it's really interesting that you bring that up because I think we're at a political height of just seeing the different states act on this new legislation and legislation that we've never seen before, not like this. And also, I've never considered that different states creating legislation will maybe cause state rivalry on where they are as far as their progression in AI legislation. Another question that I have is, since everything in AI is kind of moving at a rapidly quick pace, what would you say as far as those kind of jobs? I think the skill sets that we've had before prior to have been stuff that we've seen over decades, over years of saying the same, okay, I need this set of skill to work at this job, but AI is still nouveau. So what would you say is the kind of skills that people wanting to work in those fields would need?
Yeah, it's a question I get asked a lot by a lot of young people. And my advice is I call them the conglomerate of human-centric skills. So your ability to communicate effectively, know your audience, know your objective, collaborate with others, leadership, having an entrepreneurial spirit, I think is really helpful. But the genesis of all of this is the workforce is not going to be the same as it has been. And I think what's frustrating for a lot of young folks is they're getting this advice from their parents who had a very traditional pipeline of you go to school, you do this thing, you get this training, you do this. I don't think it's necessarily going to be like that. And again, I don't have all the answers, but I talk to a lot of smart people who are thinking about these things. So something you have to think about is, how do you build credibility so that people trust you? How do you continue to have connections in your network? I think those are things that, like, y'all already know. These are things you guys are doing this summer in DC. But I don't think those skills go away. I think those soft, we call them soft skills, but I think soft skills are going to be the new hard skills, to be frank. And so I think building a degree of personal brand recognition for yourself as well is advice that I have been giving people, because at the end of the day, employers, regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of how much AI is related to that or not, people want to know, what value do you bring to this? And people can tell really quickly if you're not able to showcase that effectively. So, and there's, a whole host of things within the scope of, like, building your personal professional brand. But it's a new way of thinking. That's not something that I think our parents or our grandparents necessarily thought of as a core component of their careers.
I want to ask a few of the more, I guess, newer questions. I think typically we get the questions on, like, security and privacy, what that looks like, public trust. One of the questions that I have is, what other emerging technologies do you believe deserve more attention over the next decade?
It's a good question. AI is only the beginning of a lot, and I think people are missing the mark on that. One thing I'm concerned about from the DC public policy perspective is we were kind of behind in addressing this AI stuff. We are behind. People were talking about AI leading to job loss and all this automation stuff like decades ago, and nobody did anything about it. No one was proactive. There are other forms of technology that are the next wave of this. I think quantum computing is a new one where a lot of people still don't know really what that is. I'm still learning what that is. The Hill really doesn't know what that is. The executive is they just passed an executive order that's like funding initiatives in this and whatnot. Robotics is increasing at an exponential rate. It's starting to pick up in media attention, but not to the extent with AI. There's a lot of questions with that. Biotech, so like neurotechnology, brain chip technology, that kind of stuff raises a lot of questions around autonomy, around ethics. There's a whole host of things, and these things are being developed in real time. These are not necessarily hypotheticals, though they're being framed as hypotheticals. And then, I mean, more in the immediate, the smart glasses, like these are all just subsets of AI. And I think what the goal is of a lot of folks in that kind of technology ecosystem is back to the disengagement point. Like, the more people kind of disengage when we're in this AI phase and just like don't question things about it, then when we get to these other forms of technologies, then there's this fatigue, and then like at that point it's the Wild West. So that's kind of what concerns me more than the AI that we have in the moment, the generative AI, the chatbots, the agentic AI. Like, yes, there are risks and concerns and things that should be addressed appropriately, but it's the kind of lack of forward thinking for these other things that I think are big challenges.
prior to being in this AI space where you're a lot more enlightened that you probably were before, what were the concerns that you had and how do you feel like they've changed now that you are in that space yourself?
Good question. When I was first interested in this space from the vantage point of cybersecurity, that was more out of concern of, a lot of the things we rely on have a digital component, pretty much everything at this point. So our water, our energy, our mobile devices, our ability to access Wi-Fi, our financial information, everything is digital. And my concern was if these things aren't secure, there's a lot of implications as quote unquote malicious actors find ways to exploit that. And in the security conversation, there were a lot of shifts in policy approaches, in the kind of messaging around, so how much should this be left up to the consumer or organizations individually to be cyber secure versus what should the government do? Like where is the onus? I think there's still a lot of things that haven't been fully addressed with that and that are only exacerbated by AI. I think now a lot of organizations and even people have understood and have embraced the importance of adopting cybersecurity practices and quote unquote cyber hygiene. AI doesn't necessarily create brand new security risks, but it exacerbates existing ones. So there's a lot of data around threat intelligence from, and this is public, from like Google and some of the cybersecurity companies that publish this. And a lot of the actors are not reinventing the wheel, but they're able to automate wide-scale cyber attacks at a much faster rate than ever before. And so if there's kind of a basic security infrastructure layer that is weak already, then that's bad for organizations, for governments, for people. So the AI conversation and the security conversation go hand in hand. So I guess having that background and having that interest early on fed into this, and being able to go into these AI policy conversations and talk about it from a security standpoint is very helpful. But a lot of people with AI think of it as more than just security, but also safety.
I want to open the floor to some questions, if we have any.
Hi, my name is Kaylee Vasquez, and I'm a current intern at the Office of Congresswoman Frederica S. Wilson. I just want to thank you for coming to speak to us today. I know that you mentioned that you were a communications major during your undergrad, and I understand that like a lot of policy misunderstandings comes because there's not an appropriate use of the language, and that's like why both parties sometimes cannot come to an agreement when it comes to these terms. So I was wondering, like, what are some of the tactics that you use to better like communicate with them and just like help them come to like a better collaborative approach when they work between each other?
It's a great question. And just so I understand, so like in terms of engaging between like policy people and comms people, right? And technical people, I think understanding where each kind of individual role in that ecosystem, like what their goals are, is important for the communicator, and grounding things in ways that the intended stakeholder or audience will care about is really important. And that's not to say, I hate using the word like dumb down. You don't want to communicate something in a way where you're omitting critical information, but you have to get kind of creative in how to message something to particular people, and like every audience is different. So I'll give you an example. I mentioned that I work in a nonpartisan capacity, and I go to offices on the Hill all the time, Republicans and Democrats. We have the same, my organization has a key set of policy priorities and policy principles that have been the same for many years in terms of what we're trying to achieve. But depending on who you're talking to on the Hill, you kind of shift the message a little bit, right? You know who is that person, who is that member, et cetera. And I think when it comes to industry being able to convey things effectively to these other folks with their kind of different positioning, I think that is really important. And similar to what I was saying earlier about industry needs to do a better job like messaging benefits, I think that's leaning into things that are on the affirmative rather than the defensive is really important. But also a big component of communicating effectively is being able to listen as well. Listen, not lecture. I think folks that use their communication abilities as a mechanism to lecture people, mansplain, womansplain, whatever. Like we have a lot of that in this town, but it's not always like that doesn't move the needle. That doesn't build trust. So meeting people where they are, understanding that they may be in a very different place from where you are on a subject. The knowledge may be very, very vast. A lot of it is trial and error too. Like you're not always going to hit the nail on the head, but a lot of it comes with just experience and just trying things out too. So yeah, that's kind of what I've come to.
I wanted to make sure. Okay, I think he has a question.
Hello, hi. My name is Gabriel. I'm interning in Congresswoman Frederica Wilson's office, and I go to University of Florida. I wanted to ask, how has the role of your job changed within the past 2 years, given that the current presidential administration is very pro-AI, and kind of being before that 2-year period, AI was still in the I would say the fetal stage of being developed and kind of talked about. So can you talk about how that administration and its policies have affected your role and your job?
It's a great question. So when I started this job, we were in the Biden administration about midway through. And the Biden administration had a kind of platform on AI. They had, they had put out an executive order. They had a lot of directives to agencies on how they should pursue AI adoption. There was a lot of effort of there's something called the NIST AI framework, responsible AI framework that was developed. So AI was a part of the conversation, but the priorities around it and addressing it were a very different tone than the current administration. And I will say it has been an adjustment for a variety of reasons, and I'm not going to say positive or negative. I think just kind of neutral in the sense that to your question, things did shift. That being said, to my point on messaging and communicating, again, our set of priorities is the same year after year. I mean, until something is passed, we have the same kind of set of objectives. So we had to sit down and strategize, okay, what matters to this administration and how do we frame our objectives in a way that will matter to them? So for them, this new administration, a lot of the way they speak about AI and, to your point, they've kind of really embraced it, is in the context of the competition with China, the quote unquote AI race. I'm sure these are talking points that you guys have heard in Washington. The kind of energy and infrastructure components of it. there's been a lot of AI executive orders that have, for the large part, been framed around, let's allow industry to flourish and all of that. What I'll say is, behind the scenes, although the kind of public-facing stuff seems like this administration is really pro AI, there are dynamics behind the scenes where it's different working with this administration on their AI policy priorities. They are very the folks who are kind of at the helm of AI policy, whether that's in the White House, whether that's in the Commerce Department, different agencies, they have a very small kind of inner circle of people who they listen to and who are really steering the ship. And I think before, in the previous administration, what I noticed was it was very accessible to have conversations with a lot of the people who were really involved in shaping or crafting AI policy. And while the Biden administration maybe didn't agree with the technology industry on everything, they allowed the technology industry to be in the room. Right now, what I've noticed is, especially in certain contexts, certain voices in the technology industry are in the room and others are not. So that has made it a little bit harder, just, kind of even figuring out where to situate and how to properly advocate when you're dealing with these dynamics. So it's been a lot more rumor mill, he said, she said, kind of, behind the scenes dynamics. But again, at the end of the day, our goals have been the same. We haven't shifted our goals, but it just has been a big adjustment. I think we're now, a little bit into this, but in a few years, if administrations change, we're in an election year too, where the dynamic of Congress may change. So you have to always be kind of open-minded to how they are seeing things and where they're putting their energy. But again, sometimes the things that are being said that are front and center are not necessarily what's always happening.
And I also think, to that point, I know the Trump administration had released an executive order regarding giving all the federal scientific data to AI so that they could come up with more innovative medical advances and just coming up with different research data, I guess I could say. So I will, to that point, agree that the Trump administration, I think, is a bit more agreeing when it comes to AI and welcoming that advancement. So
Yeah.
I think if there aren't any more questions,
I have one quick question for you. So, as someone who follows this, what recommendations, or is there a podcast or articles or anything that you subscribe to? We've talked to our students about Politico, Axios, the big players, but is there anything that is there a digest or something that you use to keep up to date with what's going on? Or is it just sitting and scrolling through the same way the rest of us do? What do you do to keep up to date with some of this information?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a little bit all over the place. I'm glad you've recommended Politico, Axios, all of those. The reporters in those outlets are fantastic. I'm someone, I'm chronically on LinkedIn all the time scrolling, so I've basically just followed not only the news sources, but all the organizations who are dealing with technology policy, all of the kind of key thought leaders. And that's where I sometimes get more rapid response developments. There's so many, Substack is becoming big right now, and I don't have a particular person that I would necessarily recommend, but I think that's a good place to, if you want to go beyond just the headlines and what has happened in the news, and you want to get more analysis and perspective from different types of experts who sit at different points of the ecosystem, I recommend that. Because I think it's important to, there's a whole echo chamber of all of this AI news. There's like news dropping literally every day. So I also think it's important to sit and not only just consume like what is happening, but to like think through it, see how other people are thinking through it. And I think that's how we all like collectively get smarter, is by reflecting on it. But also, like, to my point earlier about people disengaging, if we're just over flooded with with information about AI all the time, like, people are going to want to tune out. But I think this is the key moment to stay informed. So I think it's great you're encouraging students to do that. But I don't have like a magic source where I totally rely on.
Okay, the last question, just to wrap up. Is there one piece of advice you hope every student leaves with today? What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, my advice, I'm one perspective. I think it's easy to feel discouraged and pessimistic in the environment we're in when we're living through a time where there is a lot of unknown and also a lot happening really fast. I would say it's really important for people to stay encouraged rather than discouraged. Like, you should continue to feel empowered. You're prioritizing your education. You're here in DC. You're building these connections. I think don't give up, and like, don't underestimate the value of your voice in all of this as well. I regularly talk to like big groups of high school students, actually, and I tell them, even I did a middle school group a few weeks back, like, you can use your voice, whether that's with your peers, whether that's, you are in a town hall meeting with your lawmaker and you bring this up. There's so many forums now where you can share your perspective. So I think not only being a consumer of what's going on, but also like being an active participant, you should feel empowered to do that. Whether you love AI, whether you hate it, like, bring it all on. We all need to rely on each other to feel like we have a say in what is going on. And I think that will lead to better outcomes that serve people in a better way, rather than like handing it over to a select few. So that's my take. I try to be an optimist on this. That's why I do this line of work. Is, I don't agree with everything that I am tasked with advocating for, but something that I believe very deeply, and also my boss, whom is why I came to work for him, is we believe in pushing the industry to do better. And part of that is like, you need smart people in the adjacent environment to kind of push things in a better direction. So I would say, don't completely discount like big bad technology. Like, yeah, some of it is big and some of it is bad, but there are people with good intent in this field, and if that's something that you want to partake in, you definitely should.
Thank you so much, Bethany. We were really grateful to have you here. If we could give Bethany a round of applause. Thank you, and that will be us concluding today's session.
And I have business cards, and if anyone wants to stay in touch or reach out to me individually.